India's Prime Minister vows to crush Maoist violence as his government embarks on a massive effort to counter the growing influence of the left-wing rebels. What does it take for India to stem this threat, and how serious is it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Imran Garda. Left-wing extremism is one of the greatest threats to Indian national security. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has declared that the threat posed by Maoist rebels is second only to cross-border terrorism. Singh was speaking at a meeting with state leaders on internal security. The speech has come just a week after India announced it would deploy the army and air force to combat the rebels. He said that recent attacks by the Maoists, also known as the Naxalites, had claimed too many victims and that without action, more could be on the horizon.
There have been heavy casualties inflicted recently on our security forces by the Naxalite groups. There are also indications of yet more offensive action by these groups. The problem of left-wing extremism is indeed a complex one. There is a need for a balanced and nuanced strategy to deal with it. On the one hand, the state should discharge its responsibilities and obligations and re-establish the rule of law in areas dominated by the Naxalites. At the same time, we should work towards removing the causes which lead to alienation of people and problems like Naxalism.
Well, the Maoists have been active since the rise of communism in the 1960s. According to Indian intelligence reports, up to 22,000 Maoist rebels are active in more than half of the country's 29 states, carving what is known as a red corridor from the country's northeast to the deep south. While the movement is fragmented into several disputing factions, some of them politically inclined, while others involved in armed guerrilla fights. In recent years, they've dramatically stepped up their attacks. Thousands have died in Maoist campaigns across the country. The Maoists say they're fighting for the rights of the poor, but the Indian government considers them terrorists and recently banned their political wing from the parliament. Okay, joining us now are our guests in New Delhi, DC Nath. He's the Executive President of the International Institute of Security and Safety Management. In London, Radha D'Souza, she's a Law Research Fellow at the University of Westminster. And in Washington, DC, Sadanand Dume. He's a journalist and author of the book, My Friend, the Fanatic. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. If I could start off with you, Ms. D'Souza, what, in your opinion, makes the Maoists tick? At this moment in time, what exactly do they want?
I think if you want to understand Maoism in India, there are two very basic issues, I think, which people need to really come to grips with. And the first one is the extraordinary police tyranny and violence against ordinary people. And I'm not talking about reactive violence here. I'm talking about routine, everyday violence in the lives of the poor. And if you can't understand this, I don't think your viewers can really come to grips with what Maoism is all about. The second thing is the extent to which the institutions of the state have been hijacked by the rich, particularly in recent times. You can see like rise of houses like the Ambanis and Reliance and so on. Now, the difference is that before the 1990s, these actions were not legitimized by the society, the wider society. That it was not okay for the rich to hijack the state. It was not okay for the police to treat the poor badly, and therefore it was a different kind of era. But I think with the economic liberalization and the neoliberal policies and so on, there's a sense where somehow these things can pass. And I think one needs to come to grips with this to understand the present crisis.
Okay, let's get a response from DC Nath, because I'm assuming DC Nath doesn't agree with that.
Yes. No, not at all. Not at all. I'm convinced that this is a total misreading of the situation. My friend who mentioned about this constant police tyranny, this has nothing to do with the rise of Naxalism or Maoist violence. I'll request her to look back into history, what is the origin of the Maoist movement, nationalist violence in India. They started off with a philosophy, the dictatorship of the proletariat. So that, and they wanted class annihilation, and based on certain ideology at that time. But today's Maoist violence, they have their recent document as late as June 12, 2009, they are aiming at simple capturing state power, and they are trying to confront the state government frontally. And second point, the riches are going to the particularly rich section. It's not fully correct. The government of India has undertaken number of schemes to create development at the ground level, educationally, also economically oriented to uplift them. Yes, there has been some, you can say, lack of governance in certain areas which has helped this Maoist movement to grow. But I strongly differ. There are two reasons for which the Maoist violence has taken this shape. This movement has a lot of sustenance from clandestine channel. I am sure those of students of history, they are aware
what sort
of
of clandestine channels, Mr. Nath?
Well, they do maintain connection with the various other insurgent groups in the northeast, even the LTT. As a matter of fact, there are some recent report also that they are in touch with the LET. And then because of their international configuration, we suspect from the intelligence agencies that they receive a lot of financial assistance as well. Otherwise, only by extortion or by taxes which they impose, they cannot sustain a movement of this nature, of this level.
Okay, let's go to Washington, D.C. Sadat and Dume. Is that an exaggeration from Mr. Nath?
I wouldn't call it an exaggeration. My own perspective is somewhat different, however. You know, if you step back and you look at this problem from a distance, what you're seeing is that this is armed mobilization by some of the poorest Indians in some of the poorest parts of India. By and large, these are people who have not prospered the way they have not prospered in the era of globalization. Many of their demands, both political and economic, are legitimate. However, I think the gross exaggeration is to blame this entirely on police tyranny. That is simply not true. There is police tyranny, and that should be condemned, but it's much more complex than that. So what you have is very ideologically committed cadres, some of which do have international links, involved in what they see as a revolutionary movement to overturn the Indian state. Is the Indian state entirely blameless? Of course not. But is it all the fault of the Indian state? Of course not, too.
Radha D'Souza, it's much more complex than police tyranny, says Mr. Dume.
Yes, I've heard that. And I want to make 2 points here. One is, I think that it is to say that the position of equidistance, you know, there is something wrong with the state and there's something wrong with Maoists. So we, the liberal intellectuals or whatever, we stand the middle ground. I think it's fundamentally problematic, because what it does is, what is happening now is, in the name, the whole discourse, the whole debate about Maoist violence is turning attention away from the real issues on the ground. And the real issues on the ground are the economic policies where people are being evicted from land, where land is being increasingly given over to all these mega development projects.
But it's not talking about Maoist violence that is diverting from the realities on the ground. It's the Maoist violence itself, isn't it? The fact that they're committing attacks.
No, it is not. No, it is diverting, because if you just look at what do the Maoists ask, what are their demands? For example, if you look at Lalgarh today, where there is a major standoff between the Indian state and, you know, the Maoists, as the press says, and there is mass mobilization there. But what exactly, let's forget about the violence bit and ask, what are they asking for? First, they are asking that the police should not indulge in excesses, they should not rape, they should not arrest without warrant, etc., etc. The second demand they are saying is everybody should be given cultivable land. People who don't have land must be given cultivable land. Forests must be protected. Minimum wages must be paid without kickbacks, without cuts, you know, whatever is a thing. Now, when you actually go into these issues, in fact, in many of the areas, people talk about Maoist violence, but they don't talk about what they actually do there. All they do is to tell people you are entitled to so much minimum wage, you are entitled to protection of forests, you are entitled to education, primary schools, appointment of people in schools, you know, where posts have been vacant for years. Now, these are the actual demands. Now, these demands are completely sidelined from the debate. You can't separate this from the Maoists. Now, of course, you might say that the Maoists are exploiting the situation. Maybe they are. But the point is, for the since 1947, these fundamental issues, they have not been addressed. And every time, in fact, it gets worse and worse. And imagine yourself in the place of an Adivasi or an indigenous person or a landless laborer. I mean, since 1997 to now, it's a publicly known fact in India that about 200,000 farmers have committed suicide.
Let's go to Mr.
because of the failure of agricultural policy.
Okay, fair enough. You made your point. Try and expand your argument throughout the debate here. Mr. Dume, it's a fair argument, isn't it, that there is grassroots support for the Maoists because of lack of developments. People they're not seeing development, they're not seeing equal land distribution, no electricity, no fundamental rights in the communities they're living in, isn't it?
No, let me address the underlying issue, but first let me get to her point about this is not sidelined from the debate. This is central to the debate. This is the entire debate in India. You could argue, and I would agree with her, that it doesn't get enough attention. You could argue that the press and the media in India is too focused on the cities and not focused enough on what is happening in the countryside. That I would agree with. But the debate in India really is about these issues. It is about land rights, it is about education and so on. And people who write about this do write precisely about this set of issues. So the debate, the problem is not that the debate sidesteps the issues. The problem is that there is not enough of a debate on this, on Maoism. To get beyond that, I think that her point about the underlying causes is well taken. Nobody is going to disagree with that. The fact is that these are very poor people. The fact is that the Indian state could do much more for them. The fact is that the underlying causes that help the Maoists organize are very real. No one is denying, or no one who looks at these issues is denying any of that. However, there is a difference between accepting that there are underlying injustices and accepting the forms of violence that the Maoists follow. These are very, very different positions.
Let's bring in DC
where
Nath.
I depart from her position.
Okay, let's bring in DC Nath. DC Nath, I want to talk about the idea of it being a threat, the Maoists being a major security threat to India. Surely it doesn't really compare to the borderless type of threat that India faced, for example, in the Mumbai attacks. Surely there's no comparison between the two.
No, I agree. But before I go to the security threat, let me also underscore the point that though I belong to the intelligence security analyst system, we are also liberal. We are not closed-minded. The fact has to be first appreciated, the type of manifestation of this violence. I fully agree with my friend from Washington who said the analysis. There are certain causes, no doubt about it. But the type of violence they are now generating and taking the power through the barrel of the gun, now they have accepted as their state philosophy to capture power. They are now declared in the documents which are available in the public domain. You cannot deny that, the violent quotient in their philosophy, in their act. Talking about the threat, no doubt about it that it is one of the, as today our Honorable Home Minister also had said, there are the three elements of threat to India's security: terrorism, insurgency, and Maoist violence. The type of violence they are indulging in without any discrimination, without any ideological basis, this definitely poses a very serious threat to the government. But I must say, without being an apologist for the government, I must say the government of late have taken, it seems to have taken a political decision to counter this, not only through law enforcement agencies, but also through socio-economic development. Therefore, my reading is this threat has now been assessed, and so it will continue for some time, but if the government carries on with the present day policy, we should succeed in stemming the tide.
Radha D'Souza, the point being that the Maoists have actually hijacked the cause of those very people they claim to be defending, that they are power hungry. We know that not long ago they controlled a tribal area in West Bengal state for over 7 months. They've spoken repeatedly of trying to go towards the city of Kolkata and actually taking it. It's a fair point. The Maoists seem to be power hungry and they seem to be wanting to use violence to exercise that.
Let's put this in perspective a little bit. I mean, I think in your introduction, you said something about this movement being there since the 1960s. Actually, this is a the movement of the poor for land, for development, and against
But the point is that the Maoists are not synonymous with the poor, are they? They're not one and the same thing.
Well,
that's a heavy claim.
That is not the point. The point is that if the government had actually implemented the kind of policies that they say exist for the poor, the Maoists would have no ground to stand on.
All right, let's take that point to Sadanand Dume. It's a fair point made by Radha D'Souza that if the government had actually implemented the policies it said it wanted to implement and put its money where its mouth was, then the Maoists would have no ground to stand on. It would have no leverage for its argument.
No, absolutely. I mean, if the point she's making is that India is a messy democracy and that the Indian government has not always delivered or often not delivered, especially to the poorest people in the country, nobody who follows the country is going to contest that. Where I disagree with her, however, is in her analysis of India post-1991 and whether capitalism is to blame or not. And here, of course, we have a deep philosophical disagreement. I think the problems with Eastern and Central India is not that there is too much capitalism in India, but is that these are the areas which do not get investment, which are not exposed to capitalism, which have not really joined the modern economy. So the answer is twofold.
Okay, so contest it. Radha D'Souza, contest it.
Go ahead.
All right. Now, he says that there is more, in the states where there has been capitalist development is where we are seeing the farmer suicides. I mean, since 1997 to now, there are about 200, it's official figures that about 200,000 farmers have committed suicide. Now, these suicides have happened in 5 states, which are some of the most developed states in the country, like Maharashtra, like Andhra Pradesh, like places that the developed regions. And the farmers who have committed suicide are those who have switched from subsistence farming, having faith in the market and having faith that by switching to commercial crops, to export-oriented crops, they are going to benefit. On the contrary, they have been completely dumped. We have seen this in the first Green Revolution, which was a failure, and now in the second Green Revolution, which we are seeing corporatization of agriculture, we are seeing a completely different kind of social collapse. Okay. So you can't just say, you know, the point is that India as a whole cannot be bifurcated into this section or that section, because the so-called developed section, what Dume calls capitalist India, feeds off the underdeveloped India.
I'm sorry,
but
Ms. D'Souza, if you look, we're talking about Maoism here, and if you look at the Maoist violence, where is Maoist violence? It's in Chhattisgarh, it's in Jharkhand, it's in Bihar, it's in Bengal. It is not in Gujarat. It is not in Maharashtra. It is not in Karnataka. It is not in Tamil Nadu. It is not in Punjab. I don't know what I mean, you can make a different argument and we can talk about the farmer suicides, but that really is getting off topic over here. We're talking about Maoist violence, where it occurs, and whether it maps onto post-liberalization economic success in India or not.
Okay, let's go to DC Nath. Now, DC Nath, the main argument from Radha D'Souza seems to be that neoliberal capitalism has hurt rural India, which has led to the attacks from the Maoists.
Well, as we see this, I think we are mixing up issues. Let us take, for example, what was done in West Bengal, where this Maoist problem first had originated. They had undertaken serious land reforms, and that is why for several years Maoist virtually vanished from West Bengal. But now that it has cropped up again due to various other reasons. But let me at this stage bring another factor. The government of India, see, it is easy to blame find vulnerabilities in the system, but we are not looking at, my friend in London is not looking at the nature of the problem, nature of the Maoist leadership, their ideology. We must look into this also, not only the other aspect. And secondly, a very important aspect of Government of India's policies, without being an apologist of the Government of India has always had worked within the framework of democracy. We have tolerated dissent, we have tolerated dissonance up to a level. So we have not gone for a military solution at all. My diagnosis is,
you don't say Lalgarh is a military solution?
Let me come to Lalgarh has come at a different stage, but overall Naxalite movement in the country, Lalgarh is an episode, had to be treated differently because of other political intricacies brought in by Srimati Mamata Banerjee. But Maoist violence as such, that is not reflected in Lalgarh. Lalgarh is an episode. Look at their documents.
Okay.
Look at the philosophy.
Okay. Now, Rana D'Souza, the two other guests have strongly opposed you, so I'm going to give you the final thought in 30 seconds if you can. We are running out of time. Chart the way forward for the solution between the standoff between the Maoists and the government.
Well, the solution has been on the card since 1947. It's land reforms. It's a model of development that is based on justice. It is a question of, there's a belief that somehow terrorism can be combated with military force and police force. But it is a switching of policy that is needed, where terrorism can only be combated on the basis of justice. Without justice, we can never combat terrorism. This is the reality.
Okay.
And if we don't come to grasp with this reality, there is no future forward.
Okay, we have run out of time. Radha D'Souza, DC Nath and Sadanand Dume, thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here. It's a fascinating discussion on Inside Story.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on this episode of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments, your suggestions, even your questions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye-bye.